Welcome to the Soft Revolution. My name's Leo Carlian, and the idea this show is exploring is what softness looks like when it becomes a strategy instead of the apology. Today is episode 3. There's a specific kind of person who is absolutely, immovably, eye-wateringly certain that their religion is the right one. They haven't asked themselves even once what they might believe if they'd been born 3,000 miles east or west or south. They haven't asked themselves what they would believe if their mother had been holding a different holy book on the day she gave birth to them. They walk around with a certainty that was handed to them, free of charge, before they could pronounce their own name. And they'll defend that certainty with their life, sometimes with somebody else's life. I find this fascinating. Not annoying, not even offensive really, fascinating. Because the entire thing rests on a coincidence so massive that if you look at it directly, it almost stops being funny and starts being beautiful. The geography of where your mother was standing when her waters broke decided which god you would spend your life defending. Faith is a postcode. We just don't like to say it out loud. Okay, let me give you the cleanest version of this I can. If you'd been born somewhere else, genuinely just somewhere else, on the same day to a different family, you would be a different religion right now to what you are. You would be defending it with the same certainty you currently hold about your current religion. You'd think the people kneeling in your current direction were the ones who got it wrong. Nobody likes this thought, so most people don't sit with it for very long. But it's the cleanest piece of evidence we have for what religion actually is. It's not transmitted by truth. It's transmitted by proximity, by whose lap you sat in growing up, by what language you learned to count in, by which building was on your nearest road. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now look, I want to say what this episode is not. This is not an argument against faith. I'm not interested in that. I think the impulse to look up at the sky and feel small is one of the most beautiful things human beings do. I think the instinct to gather in a room with other people and sing and hold hands and say a prayer over food is gorgeous. I think the part of you that lights a candle when somebody dies, even when you don't believe in anything, is the part of you worth keeping. It's human. Faith is not the problem. The middlemen are the problem, and the middlemen have been the problem for a very, very long time. Let me take you back about 1700 years. There's a Roman emperor called Constantine. He's about to fight a battle outside Rome. He's not, at this point in his life, a Christian. Christianity is a minority religion. It's been illegal for most of the previous 3 centuries. In fact, Christians have been thrown to lions, set on fire, used as garden lighting at parties, all of which, by the way, is documented in Roman writing, not just Christian writing. The night before the battle, Constantine allegedly has a vision, a cross in the sky, a voice that says, "In this sign you will win." He paints crosses on his soldiers' shields and he wins the battle. He becomes emperor of half the known world. And then slowly, over the next 25 years, he turns Christianity from an illegal minority faith into the official religion of the most powerful empire on earth. But Constantine wasn't actually baptized until he was on his deathbed, 25 years after the vision. 25 years of using Christianity to unify his empire, and he didn't get round to becoming a Christian himself until he was about to die. The historian Ramsay MacMullen at Yale documents this in detail. The man who made Europe Christian wasn't really one until it stopped being politically useful to be ambiguous. A few years into his reign, he called a meeting. About 300 bishops in a room in what's now Turkey. Their job was to decide by vote what Christians were actually supposed to believe, which gospels would count as real, which ones would be banned, whether Jesus was divine, human, or both, what the Holy Trinity even meant. 300 men in a room voting on God, and whatever lost the vote got burned. I want you to sit with that for a second. The version of Christianity that 2 billion people on earth currently follow is the version that won a vote in Turkey almost 2,000 years ago. There were other versions. There were gospels that didn't make the cut. There were Christianities that believed Jesus was purely human, Christianities that believed there were 2 gods, Christianity that gave women equal leadership. All of them existed. All of them had followers, all of them had communities, and all of them were declared wrong and systematically destroyed because 300 men in a room decided they weren't on brand. This is not me being edgy. This is not a Dan Brown novel. This is a historian, Tomoko Musazawa at the University of Chicago, who has written about how the very idea of world religions is a European invention from the 19th century. It's not a description of how the world actually organized faith. It's a filing system someone invented, and we all started using it. Every time you hear someone say, "my religion teaches," what they usually mean, whether they know it or not, is the version of my religion that won the politics of a particular century teaches. Do you think your religion is the true one? Interesting. Because here's a question no one likes answering. If you'd been born in a hospital in Karachi instead of the one you were born in, would you still be the same religion? Obviously not. You'd be defending a completely different God with exactly the same conviction you've got now about your religion. You'd be just as certain. You'd think the people kneeling in your current direction were the ones who got it wrong. Every person on earth has done this experiment. They just got the result that matched the postcode they were born in. And then they walked around the rest of their lives calling that result the truth. A baby in Dublin doesn't pick Catholicism. A baby in Tehran doesn't pick Islam. A baby in Tel Aviv doesn't pick Judaism. They got handed a map by someone who got handed the same map by someone who got handed the same map. It's maps all the way down. If your belief in God depends on a building you didn't choose to be born in, the belief isn't really about God. It's geography. Faith is a postcode, and we made it gospel. Just some food for thought. Right, carrying on. A few decades after Constantine, another Roman emperor makes Christianity the official state religion of the entire empire. All other versions of faith are now illegal. Pagans are persecuted, temples are demolished, the Library of Alexandria, which had been the greatest collection of human knowledge in the ancient world, is gradually torn apart in waves of attacks across the next 2 centuries. Nobody burns a library because they disagree with what's on the shelves. They burn it because they don't want you reading. This is not religion. This is empire learning to speak in religious vocabulary. And once you learn to hear that vocabulary, you start hearing it everywhere. Fast forward to the year 1095. The Pope at the time stands up at a place called Clermont in what's now France, and he tells an audience of European nobles that God wants them to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims. What he doesn't say out loud is that the European nobility has been running out of land for younger sons to inherit, that the church is in a power struggle with the empire to the east, and that a holy war is the perfect way to redirect aristocratic violence outward instead of letting it tear Europe apart from the inside. The Crusades go on for 200 years. The first one alone kills tens of thousands of Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians who happened to be in the wrong city at the wrong moment. One chronicler describes the streets of Jerusalem after the Christian armies arrived as running ankle deep with blood. That's not propaganda. That's a Christian writing approvingly. God wanted this, allegedly. And somehow, weirdly, what God wanted lined up perfectly with what the Pope needed politically. I want to pause here and address the strongest objection, because I know it's already forming. Someone is listening to this and thinking, okay, but religion has also done extraordinary things. It built hospitals, it built universities, it abolished slavery in Britain, partly through the Quakers. It produced a civil rights movement, sermons in church basements that changed a country. It produced the songs that got people through the worst nights of their lives. It produced Rumi. It produced Bach. It produced Mother Teresa, Kabir, the Dalai Lama. It produced the impulse that makes a stranger feed another stranger. All of that is true. I'm not arguing against any of it. What I'm arguing is that the same instinct, the deep human need to connect to something larger than yourself and to belong to a community that does the same, has been used as both a blanket and a weapon. The blanket is real. The weapon is also real. And the people who only want to talk about the blanket are usually the same people who don't want you looking too closely at the weapon. Because every religion has the same heart. Love, compassion, humility, the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. This turns up in almost identical wording in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Confucianism, Jainism, Sikhism, and many others. The heart of the thing is universal. The costume changes, and the costume is what we kill each other over. It was never about God. It was about who got to be the middleman. Quick callback to episode 1 of this podcast before we go further, because this is the same playbook. Episode 1 was about empire, specifically the British one, specifically the centuries-long business operation that extracted wealth from one continent and called it civilization. The central image I used was a receipt with a date torn off, the way an entire economic project, once it succeeds, presents itself as a natural order rather than a series of decisions made by specific men in specific rooms. Religion is the same shape. The receipt is older, but the model is the same. Find a population, install a layer between them and whatever they're looking for, take a percentage of every transaction, and after a few generations, the layer becomes invisible. It becomes like weather. People stop noticing that there's a middleman at all and start assuming that the middleman is part of the architecture of the universe. Empire is the business model of taking land. Organized religion, at its worst, has been the business model of taking certainty. And the people who built both got very rich, and their statues are still very, very polished. Okay, Spain, the late 1400s. Something called the Spanish Inquisition begins. The historian Henry Kamen at Yale has done the cleanest modern work on this. He points out something most people don't know. The Inquisition wasn't really targeting random Catholics for impure thoughts. Its main targets were Jews and Muslims who'd been forced to convert to Catholicism and whose loyalty to the crown was politically suspect. The Inquisition was a state intelligence operation wearing a clerical robe. It was about consolidating Spanish national identity by purging the populations whose conversion looked unreliable. Religion was the cover story. The project was political loyalty. Tens of thousands of people were tortured, killed, or expelled. 250,000 Spanish Jews were forced to flee in 1492 alone, the same year, incidentally, that Columbus set sail. The same year, the same crown, the same hunger. The king and queen who ordered all of this are not remembered for any of it in Spanish public memory. They are remembered for unifying Spain, for discovering America, for being faithful servants of God. The receipt has been torn. And then there were the witches. Between roughly the years 1450 and 1750, across Europe, the historian Brian Levac estimates that somewhere between 40 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft. The vast majority were women. The persecutions clustered around periods when things were going badly, like failed harvests, plagues, wars, when the children died, when the harvest failed, when the men came back home from war broken. Someone had to be blamed, and it turned out to be, with extraordinary consistency, the women who knew how to read the moon, the women who knew which plants brought on a period and which ones ended a pregnancy, the women who had stayed unmarried and owned their own land, the women whose neighbors owed them money. The witch hunts were a real estate project. They were a knowledge suppression project. They were, in many cases, a debt clearance project. And they were sold to the public as holy duty. I want you to imagine being a midwife in 17th century Germany. You know the herbs. You know how to turn a baby in the womb. You know the dosages. You've been doing this since you were 14 when your grandmother taught you. You are the village's entire medical system. There's no hospital. There's no doctor. There's you and there's God. And one day, someone you quietly disagreed with at the market accuses you of being a witch. And the priest hears the accusation, and the magistrate hears the accusation. And 3 weeks later, you are tied to a stake in the square you grew up in, and the same people who came to you when their children were sick are watching you burn. God wanted this, allegedly. And somehow, weirdly, what God wanted lined up perfectly with the local landowner's interest in your property and the church's interest in being the only authorized source of healing in the village. I think about this a lot. I think about the bodies of those women carrying the knowledge they wouldn't get to pass on. I think about the daughters who watched and who chose not to learn their mother's craft. and whose own daughters never learned it either. I think about how much of what Europe later called spirituality had to be re-imported from India and China in the 20th century because the original infrastructure had been deliberately, on the record, destroyed. A culture that burns its own healers doesn't stop needing healing. It just starts looking for healers somewhere else and calling that yoga. If your God needs you to fight for him, he's not God. He doesn't need you to defend his honor in the comments. He doesn't need you to report the video. He doesn't need you to write "go to hell" under a reel. If he made galaxies, black holes, and the entire concept of consciousness, he probably doesn't need Kevin from Somerset to win an argument for him on Instagram. And yet, every time I post something even mildly questioning, a very specific kind of person appears, typing with one hand, grammar going through something, absolutely furious that the omnipotent creator of the universe is being slandered in a comment section they must personally defend. And the loudest defenders are always the ones who skipped the humble, patient, merciful bits of holy books and went straight to the smiting. A friend of mine has a saying, the Bible is the most quoted, least read book in history, and that probably applies to all holy books. Because if your God needs you to fight for him, he's not God. He's a brand you've got shares in. Just some food for thought. And now I want to bring this home with one more example because it's the one that lands hardest for anyone in the South Asian diaspora, and it's also the cleanest illustration of what happens when religion becomes the language of empire. 1947, the partition of India. A British barrister named Cyril Radcliffe, who had never set foot in India in his life, is given 5 weeks to draw a line on a map dividing British India into two countries, one for Muslims, one for Hindus. He's given outdated population data. He's given no time to talk to local communities. He draws the line in London. He never sees the land he's dividing. What follows is one of the largest forced migrations in human history. Estimates of the death toll range from several 100,000 to 2 million, depending on which historian you read. Somewhere between 10 and 20 million people are displaced. Communities that had lived side by side for centuries, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, turn on each other in spasms of violence that nobody who survived ever fully recovered from. Trains arrive at stations carrying nothing but corpses. Women throw themselves down wells rather than be raped by the men coming for their villages. Religion gets the blame. But religion did not draw the line. An Englishman drew the line, who'd never been to India, who finished the job and went home to a knighthood and a country house. Before partition, the Indian subcontinent had been religiously plural in a way Europe hadn't been for over 1,000 years. The historian Basham, in The Wonder That Was India, documents centuries of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, Parsis, Christians, and Jews living in overlapping, intermarrying, multilingual communities. Akbar the Great, the Mughal emperor in the 1580s, actually tried to formally create a new religion. He called it Din-e-Ilahi, the religion of God, that combined the best parts of all of the major faiths he could find. He hosted public debates in his court between religious teachers of every religion. He married a Hindu princess and let her keep her faith inside the imperial palace. He failed eventually because the strict gatekeepers of every religion he tried to combine pushed back harder than he could push forward. But the attempt itself is one of the most extraordinary moments in religious history. A Muslim emperor in South Asia 400 years ago was further along the road to religious tolerance than most of Europe is right now. And 400 years later, an Englishman with a pen redrew the map, and we've been killing each other along his line ever since. That line is what people are defending when they tell me their religion is the true one. They're not defending God. God doesn't need defending. They're defending a line a stranger drew on a map their grandparents had to flee. So, what's actually happening underneath all of this? It's not that humans are stupid. It's not that faith is fake. It's not that the people who believe are gullible and the people who don't are clever. That framing is lazy and it's not true. What's happening is that the deepest human need, the need to feel held by something larger than yourself, the need to belong, the need to make sense of suffering, It's a kind of currency. And it's the most valuable currency human beings produce. And for as long as there have been humans organized in groups larger than about 50 people, there has been someone whose job it's been to stand between you and the source of that currency and take a cut. It doesn't have to be a priest. It can be a king with a divine right. It can be a politician with a flag. It can be a tech founder with a manifesto. It can be a wellness influencer with a course. The role is the same. The costume changes. It's always, always, always the middleman. Religion didn't invent the middleman. Religion was just the longest running version of him. And the moment you see the role clearly, you start spotting him everywhere. You see him in nationalism. You see him in money worship. You see him in the cult of the self-made billionaire. You see him in the algorithm that decides what you read at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. The costume of the priest has been retired in a lot of places. The role of the priest has not. There's a song I made called Silhouette, and somewhere in the second verse, almost as an aside, there's a line I wrote. Searching for God in the sky look above, is this what it means to be an adult? I wrote that line years before I was ready to understand it, and here's what I think it means now. The version of God you were handed at 6 years old was someone else's God, someone you loved, someone whose hand you were holding. They passed it down to you the way they passed down their accent and their favorite recipe and the way they laugh when they're embarrassed. It was a gift. It was real. It was theirs. Becoming an adult is not the act of throwing that gift away. It's the act of finally looking at it and seeing both the love and the postcode it came wrapped in, and deciding on your own terms what you want to do with both. Some people keep the whole thing. Some people keep the love and let the postcode go. Some people throw the whole package out and build something new. All three are honest answers. The dishonest one is to pretend you never received a package at all, and that whatever you currently believe is something you arrived at by pure reason from a standing start. Nobody arrived at their religion from a standing start. Nobody ever. Faith is a map you were handed by people who loved you. The map can be beautiful. Follow it if it serves you. Set it down if it doesn't. But please don't pretend ever that you drew it yourself. The people who tried to convince you that their version of God was the only version were almost always trying to convince you of something else underneath. That their language was the right one. That their borders were the right ones. That their bodies were the right bodies. That their men were the right men to be in charge. The gods were never the point. The gods were the lever. The gods were the thing you couldn't argue with. The gods were how you got people to do things they wouldn't have otherwise done. The gods were the marketing department of every empire that ever existed. And somewhere, very quietly underneath all of that empire and all of that machinery and all of those wars and all of those burnings and all of those torn receipts, there has always been the actual thing. The looking up at the sky and feeling small, the lighting of the candle, the holding of the hand, the singing of the song, the impulse against all evidence that says, be kind anyway. That part was never owned by anyone. That part has no postcode. That part doesn't speak any of the languages we fought over. That part doesn't need a middleman and has never had one. If you still want to call that God, call it God. If you want to call it something else, call it something else. It answers to whatever you call it. It's been answering in different rooms, in different accents, in different songs, to children holding their grandmother's hands for as long as there have been grandmothers. We built temples on top of a feeling that was already there, and then we forgot which one was the original. I hope that makes the song sound different. not to taste the taste, trying not to face away, yeah. I roll up my sleeves and wait for the rush, 'cause sometimes your best isn't even enough. Searching for God in the sky, look above. Is this what it means to be an adult? Setting all the wheels in motion, careful where you tread. Seems like such a simple notion, staring straight ahead. Maybe I'll just make you up in my head, like a silhouette. Make you up in my head, and you pose no threat. Make you up in my head, like a silhouette. Make you up in my head, and you pose no threat. Fighting all my fears at the minute, trying to find a way to feel safe. Lighten up the cave, push the limit, trying not to taste the taste, trying not to waste the blame. No threat, make you up in my head, like a silhouette. Make you up in my head, and you pose no threat.